The morning air was crisp as Detective Simone Harris pulled into the parking garage at O'Hare International Airport. She checked her watch. 7:15 a.m. Perfect timing. The terminal would be busy enough to blend in, but not so packed that she couldn't move quickly if needed. She adjusted her navy blue blazer and grabbed her leather briefcase from the passenger seat. Today wasn't just any day. After 6 long months of late nights, endless paperwork, and carefully building a case piece by piece, she finally had what she needed: an arrest warrant for Police Chief Richard Blackwell. The weight of that document in her briefcase felt heavier than paper had any right to be. Just another day, she whispered to herself, a ritual that had carried her through 12 years on the force. But they both knew that was a lie. Taking down the chief of police wasn't just another day, not by a long shot. Simone walked through the airport with purpose. She wasn't in uniform, internal affairs officers rarely were, but something about her stride made people naturally step aside. Maybe it was the confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was doing and why it mattered. She'd been handpicked for this assignment by Captain Reynolds. "You're the best investigator we've got, Harris," he had told her in his office, blinds drawn. "And frankly, this needs to be handled by someone who can't be intimidated." What he didn't say, but they both understood, was that sending a black woman to arrest the notoriously old-school chief would also send a message. No one was above the law, not even those who enforced it. The evidence against Blackwell was substantial.
Money siphoned from the department's community outreach fund, promotions sold to the highest bidders, investigations into his friends mysteriously derailed,
And most recently, a witness tampering charge that would make even the most hardened defense attorney wince. Simone rode the escalator up to the departures level, scanning the crowds. Their intel suggested Blackwell was planning to flee the country today. A sudden vacation to a place with no extradition treaty with the United States. Classic move for someone who knew they were about to get caught. The private terminal section of O'Hare was quieter than the main areas. Plush seating, hushed conversations, and staff who were trained to be discreet made it the perfect place for those who could afford privacy, or those who needed it. She approached the security checkpoint, badge already in hand. The first officer, a younger man with a friendly face, barely glanced at it before waving her through. Easy. Maybe too easy. Simone had expected more resistance. Blackwell had friends throughout the department, people who owed him favors or believed in him despite the mounting evidence. She'd prepared herself for subtle obstruction at every turn. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from her partner, Detective Wilson, who was covering the airport's secondary exits. No sign yet. Flight plan filed for 8:30, so she had time. Not much, but enough. She found a seat near the gate where Blackwell would likely appear, opened her briefcase, and pretended to review some papers while keeping her eyes on every entrance. An older couple sat nearby, discussing their upcoming trip to see grandchildren. A businessman talked loudly on his phone about merger details he probably shouldn't be sharing in public. A young family tried to keep their toddler entertained. Normal people, living normal lives, unaware of the tension humming through Simone's body. This is what it's all about, she thought, watching the family. The little girl was showing her mother a drawing, beaming with pride, making sure they can trust the people who are supposed to protect them. Simone had joined the force right out of college, filled with idealism and determination to be part of the change she wanted to see. 12 years in, some of that shine had worn off, but the core belief remained. The badge meant something. It had to mean something. Otherwise, what was the point? Her thoughts were interrupted by movement at the entrance. Not Blackwell, but one of his frequent companions, Officer Thomas Reeves, looking nervous and checking his watch repeatedly. Interesting. Reeves wasn't on any flight manifest they'd found. Simone casually stood, moving to a position with a better view of the entrance, while staying partially hidden behind a large support column. If Reeves was here, Blackwell couldn't be far behind. She adjusted her earpiece, whispering, "Possible scout at Gate 7. Reeves has entered the terminal." Wilson's voice came back instantly. "Copy that. Backup is in position." The plan was simple, but solid. Approach Blackwell calmly and professionally, serve the warrant, and escort him out with minimal fuss. They had plainclothes officers stationed at every exit, just in case. Captain Reynolds had been explicit. This needs to be by the book, more by the book than any arrest you've ever made, because they all knew what would happen afterward. The press would descend like vultures. The police union would raise hell. Half the department would call it a witch hunt, and the other half would stay silent out of self-preservation. Politicians would scramble to distance themselves or align with whatever position polled best that week. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the law, the same law Blackwell had sworn to uphold and then broken repeatedly. Reeves was on his phone now, speaking urgently. Simone wished she could hear what he was saying. Was he warning Blackwell? Coordinating something? She couldn't move closer without risking being spotted. A voice came over the terminal speakers announcing a gate change for a commercial flight. Passengers grumbled and gathered their belongings, creating a momentary flow of movement through the area. Simone used the distraction to change positions again, ending up at a coffee kiosk with a clear view of both the entrance and the private gates. The barista smiled at her. "What can I get you?" "Just a black coffee, please." Simone returned the smile, trying to look like any other traveler starting their day. "Rough morning?" the barista asked, nodding toward the briefcase and Simone's slightly rumpled blazer. "You could say that," Simone replied, fishing out a few dollars. "About to have a meeting nobody's going to enjoy." The barista laughed. "I know those kinds of meetings. Good luck." Simone took her coffee and turned back toward the gates just in time to see Reeves rushing toward the private jet area. Something had changed. She left the coffee on a nearby table and moved quickly, staying behind groups of travelers when possible. Her earpiece crackled. "Harris, we've got confirmation. Blackwell's car just pulled up to the VIP entrance." This was it. Months of work, coming down to the next few minutes. Simone felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, her senses sharpening. She double-checked that the warrant was accessible in her jacket pocket and that her badge was ready to be displayed. Through the large windows, she could see a black SUV with tinted windows parked in the restricted area. A driver was unloading luggage, more than you'd need for a casual vacation. The back door opened, and there he was, Police Chief Richard Blackwell, looking nothing like the confident figure who dominated press conferences and department meetings. Today, he looked smaller, somehow, hunched shoulders, darting eyes, the body language of a man who knew he was cornered but still hoped for escape. He wore plain clothes rather than his usual uniform, a beige jacket that didn't suit him, and dark sunglasses despite the overcast. Simone moved toward the VIP entrance, weaving through the morning crowd with practiced ease. Just as she approached the door that would lead her to the private boarding area, a uniformed airport officer stepped directly into her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone carrying that familiar law enforcement edge that suggested this wasn't really a request. "This area is restricted." Simone reached for her badge, maintaining eye contact. "I understand. I'm Detective Harris, Internal Affairs. I have authorization to be here." The officer, his nameplate read Dawson, barely glanced at her badge before shaking his head. "I'm going to need you to step back to the main terminal area." Something wasn't right. This wasn't the standard procedure for checking credentials, even in a secure area. Simone kept her voice level. "Officer Dawson, I'm here on official police business. If you check with your supervisor, ma'am, I need you to step back now." His hand moved to rest on his holstered weapon, not drawing it, but making its presence known. "This is a secure area, and I have concerns about your presence here." And in that moment, with clarity that cut through everything else, Simone understood. Dawson knew exactly who she was and why she was there. This wasn't random. This was Blackwell's insurance policy. His eyes and ears at the airport. His advance warning system. "I see," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "And does your concern have anything to do with Chief Blackwell's unexpected trip today?" The slight widening of Dawson's eyes confirmed her suspicion. Behind him, through the glass doors, she could see Blackwell and Reeves hurrying toward a waiting private jet. Time was running out. Officer Dawson stood with his feet planted firmly, creating a human barrier between Detective Simone Harris and the private terminal area. His eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down, his gaze lingering too long on her badge before returning to her face. "I need to see some additional identification," he said, his voice carrying across the terminal loud enough to make nearby travelers turn their heads. Simone kept her expression neutral despite the frustration building inside her. She'd encountered this type of obstruction before, the unnecessary hoops, the extra scrutiny, the subtle power play to delay and intimidate. But today she didn't have time for it. "Officer Dawson," she said, keeping her voice low and controlled. "I've shown you my badge and ID. I'm here on official department business that can't wait. Now please step aside." Instead of moving, Dawson reached for his radio. "I have a situation at the private terminal entrance," he said, his eyes never leaving Simone. "Unidentified woman attempting to access the secure area, refusing to comply with security protocols." Unidentified? Simone's jaw tightened. She'd literally just shown him her credentials. This wasn't just obstruction, it was deliberate misrepresentation. "That's incorrect," she said firmly. "I am Detective Simone Harris, badge number 4729, Internal Affairs Division. I have identified myself properly and shown appropriate credentials." A small crowd was beginning to gather, curious onlookers drawn by the tension. Simone was acutely aware of how this looked, a black woman being confronted by a uniformed white officer who was now describing her as a potential threat over his radio. Through the glass doors behind Dawson, she could see Blackwell and Reeves talking to the pilot of the private jet. They were running out of time. "Officer," she tried again, "you're interfering with an active investigation." "That's a serious offense," Dawson's face hardened. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back and wait for my supervisor. We've had security concerns today, and I cannot allow unauthorized access." "What specific security concerns?" Simone challenged, knowing full well there were none, at least none that weren't manufactured by Blackwell himself. Dawson didn't answer her question. Instead, he turned slightly as two more airport security officers approached from behind him. "Escort this woman back to the main terminal," he instructed them. "She's being uncooperative." One of the officers, a younger man with a confused expression, looked between Dawson and Simone. "What's the issue here?" Simone seized the opportunity. "There is no issue. I'm Detective Harris with Internal Affairs." She flashed her badge again. "I'm here to serve an arrest warrant, and Officer Dawson is obstructing a lawful police action." The mention of an arrest warrant caught the young officer off guard. He hesitated, looking to Dawson for guidance. Dawson's face flushed with anger. "She hasn't been cleared through proper channels. Chief Blackwell himself requested heightened security today due to credible threats." And there it was, the admission that this was about Blackwell. Simone almost smiled at the slip. "Officer Rivera," she addressed the younger officer, having noted his name tag. "I need your assistance. There's an attempt to flee jurisdiction happening right now. Every second counts." Rivera looked uncomfortable, caught between respecting the chain of command and responding to what sounded like a legitimate law enforcement request. Dawson sensed the hesitation and stepped in. "This woman is making false claims. She could be anyone. For all we know, she could be part of the security threat we were warned about." Simone reached into her jacket, moving slowly to avoid any misinterpretation of her actions. "I have the arrest warrant right here," she said, pulling out the folded document. "Signed by Judge Hernandez this morning. This is real and it's happening now." Dawson's hand moved toward his weapon again. "Do not reach into your clothing," he barked, his voice echoing through the terminal. "Hands where I can see them." Dint. Atmosphere shifted instantly. Nearby travelers backed away, some pulling out phones to record the escalating situation. The second security officer who had arrived with Rivera placed his hand on his own holstered weapon. Simone froze, the document half out of her pocket. The situation was spiraling in exactly the way she'd hoped to avoid. A public confrontation. Witnesses recording. Headlines practically writing themselves. Black female officer held at gunpoint at airport. "I'm just showing you the warrant," she said calmly, though her heart raced. "The document you asked to see." "Slowly," Dawson ordered, his eyes hard. "And then place it on the ground and step back." The absurdity of the situation might have been comical if it weren't so dangerous. She was a police officer being treated like a suspect for trying to do her job. With deliberate movements, Simone removed the warrant and placed it on the floor. "This is a legal document authorizing the arrest of Police Chief Richard Blackwell on multiple charges including corruption, embezzlement, and witness tampering. Every minute you delay me is another minute you're aiding a fugitive." Rivera bent down and picked up the warrant, his eyes widening as he scanned it. "This looks legitimate," he said to Dawson, his voice uncertain. "It could be faked," Dawson insisted, though his confidence seemed to waver. "We need to verify this. Chief Blackwell didn't mention anything about—" "Of course he didn't mention it," Simone cut in. "That's why he's trying to board a private jet to a non-extradition country, right now." She pointed through the glass doors where Blackwell was now handing his luggage to the ground crew. "Look for yourself." Rivera and the other officer both turned to look, giving Simone a moment to assess her options. She could force her way through, she had the legal authority, but that risked escalation, potentially violence. She could call for backup, but by then, Blackwell's plane would be taxiing down the runway, her earpiece crackled to life. Wilson's voice came through. "Harris, what's your status? Blackwell's at the jet. Do you need assistance?" Before she could respond, Dawson's radio squawked. "All units be advised we have a potential security breach at the private terminal. Female suspect, approximately 5'7", dark complexion, wearing a navy blazer. Approach with caution. She may be armed." Simone's blood ran cold. That description was clearly meant for her, and "may be armed" was the kind of phrase that got people shot first and questioned later. "Officer Dawson," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her rising anger. "You know very well I'm not a security threat. I'm a detective with 12 years on the force. You're creating a dangerous situation based on false information." Dawson's expression remained unmoved. "I'm following protocol based on information from the chief of police himself." "The chief of police who is currently fleeing arrest," Simone pointed out. "Think about what you're doing. Think about whose word you're taking." For a brief moment, she thought she saw doubt cross Dawson's face, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the stern mask of authority. "Step back now," he ordered. "Until we verify your identity and authority, you're not going anywhere near that gate." More security personnel were arriving, drawn by the radio call. Simone counted 5 officers now, forming a wall between her and Blackwell's escape route. The crowd of onlookers had grown too, many with phones raised recording the confrontation. This was exactly the kind of circus Captain Reynolds had wanted to avoid. A public spectacle that would taint the case before it even reached a courtroom. But Simone was running out of options. She tapped her earpiece. "Wilson, I'm being detained at the security checkpoint. Blackwell is about to board. You need to move, and from your position." "Copy that," came the reply. "Moving now." Dawson frowned. "Who are you talking to?" His hand reached toward her ear. "Remove that communication device immediately." Simone stepped back out of his reach. "Do not touch me, Officer Dawson. I am not removing my department-issued equipment." The tension was a living thing now, expanding to fill the space between them. Travelers were being directed away from the area by airport staff, creating an artificial clearing with Simone and the security officers at its center. "Last warning," Dawson said, his voice tight. "Step back and surrender any communication devices." From the corner of her eye, Simone could see Blackwell through the glass doors, looking in their direction. Even from this distance, she could read his expression, a mixture of recognition, alarm, and calculation. He knew exactly what was happening. "Officer Rivera," Simone addressed the younger officer again, ignoring Dawson. "You have a choice to make right now. That warrant is real. The man named in it is about to flee the country. You can either help uphold the law or you can help a corrupt officer escape justice." Rivera looked torn, glancing between the warrant in his hand, Dawson's stern face, and Blackwell in the distance. "She's manipulating you," Dawson snapped at Rivera. "This is exactly the kind of distraction we were warned about. The chief has received death threats. This could be part of a setup." "Death threats?" Simone couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Is that what he told you? Did he mention that Internal Affairs has been investigating him for 6 months? Did he tell you about the money missing from the community outreach fund? Or the witnesses who suddenly changed their stories after private meetings with him?" Her words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of uncertainty through the gathered officers. Several exchanged glances. "She's lying," Dawson insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Through the glass, Simone saw Blackwell hurrying up the stairs to the private jet, moving with the urgency of a man who knew his time was running. "Out. He's boarding," she said, pointing. "Right now. Look at him. Does that look like a man taking a planned vacation? Or someone running from something?" Every head turned to follow her gesture, watching as Blackwell practically sprinted up the jet stairs. Simone used the distraction to step around Dawson, moving quickly toward the doors. She made it 2 steps before he grabbed her arm, yanking her back with enough force to make her stumble. "That's enough," he shouted, his face contorted with anger. "You're under arrest for trespassing in a restricted area and interfering with security operations." The absurdity of a police officer being arrested for attempting to serve a valid warrant might have been laughable in other circumstances, but with Dawson's hand painfully gripping her upper arm and Blackwell about to escape, Simone found nothing amusing about the situation. "Take your hands off me," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Now." Dawson tightened his grip. "You're coming with me until we sort this out." The doors to the private terminal burst open, and Detective Wilson strode through, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Tall and imposing, Wilson had the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. Dawson released Simone's arm but didn't back away. "This woman was attempting to breach security." "This woman," Wilson cut him off, "is Detective Simone Harris, one of the most decorated officers in Internal Affairs, and you currently have your hands on her while a suspect in a major corruption case is escaping. Want to rethink your next move, officer?" He leaned forward to read the nameplate. "Dawson?" The dynamic shifted instantly. Several of the security officers stepped back, suddenly unsure of their role in this unfolding drama. Dawson's face flushed red. "We received direct orders from Chief Blackwell." "Chief Blackwell," Wilson interrupted again, "is the subject of a warrant signed by Judge Hernandez this morning. A warrant that Detective Harris was attempting to serve when you obstructed her. So I'll ask again. Do you want to rethink your position?" The silence that followed was broken by a voice from behind them. Officer Rivera, still holding the warrant. "The documentation appears legitimate, sir, and the subject is currently boarding that aircraft." He pointed toward the private jet where Blackwell was now visible in the doorway, looking back at the terminal with visible alarm. Wilson nodded. "Thank you, Officer Rivera. At least someone here remembers their oath to uphold the law rather than protect individuals." He turned to the officers who had arrived with him. "Secure this area. No one follows unless they're part of our team." He looked at Simone. "You good, Harris?" She nodded, straightening her blazer. "I'm good. Let's finish this." As they moved toward the doors to the tarmac, Dawson called after them, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "This is a mistake. The chief would never—" Wilson turned back. "Save it for your statement, Officer Dawson. You'll be explaining your actions to professional standards tomorrow morning." The glass doors closed behind them, cutting off Dawson's reply and the murmurs of the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. As they strode across the tarmac toward the private jet, Wilson glanced at Simone. "So much for keeping this quiet, huh?" Despite everything, Simone found herself smiling. Nothing about taking down the chief of police was ever going to be quiet. Might as well embrace the chaos. Ahead of them, Blackwell stood frozen in the doorway of the jet, watching their approach with the resigned expression of a man who recognized when the game was over. The real work was just beginning. Chief Richard Blackwell froze in the doorway of the private jet, From where he stood, he could see the commotion at the terminal entrance. A cluster of security officers, travelers with phones raised, and at the center of it all, Detective Simone Harris. Even from this distance, he recognized her immediately. The detective who had been a thorn in his side for months. "Sir, we need to close the door," the flight attendant urged from behind him. "We're cleared for immediate takeoff." Blackwell didn't move. His mind raced through options, calculating odds and outcomes with the speed of a man who had spent decades evading consequences. He'd planned this escape meticulously, the private flight booked under his brother-in-law's company name, the carefully selected destination with no extradition treaty, the security alert he'd arranged to slow down anyone who might try to stop him. And yet here was Harris, somehow already at the airport. How had she known? Who had talked? He turned to Officer Reeves, who stood pale-faced near the jet's small galley. "You said we had time," Blackwell hissed. "You said they were still gathering evidence." Reeves swallowed hard. "That's what my contact said. The warrant wasn't supposed to be ready until next week." "Well, your contact was wrong." Blackwell looked back at the terminal. Harris and her partner Wilson were now moving toward the glass doors that led to the tarmac. Behind them, Officer Dawson appeared to be arguing with another security officer. The distraction wouldn't last long. "Sir, please," the flight attendant insisted. "The pilot says we need to depart now or we'll lose our slot." Blackwell's hand tightened on the door frame. He had maybe 2 minutes before Harris reached the plane. If he closed the door now and the pilot immediately taxied to the runway, they might make it. International airspace was just a short flight away, and then he'd be beyond their reach. But if they didn't make it, if Harris managed to stop the plane before takeoff, he'd be adding flight to avoid prosecution to the list of charges against him. The evidence they already had was damaging but not necessarily fatal to his career. With the right lawyer, the right political pressure, he might still salvage something. Running would make that impossible. Running would be an admission of guilt. "Chief?" Reeves prompted, his voice tight with anxiety. "What do we do?" The glass doors to the tarmac opened. Harris and Wilson stepped through, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. They began walking purposefully toward the jet. "Sir, last chance," the flight attendant said. "We close the door now or we cancel the flight." Blackwell made his decision. "Tell the pilot to start taxiing the moment the door is closed." The flight attendant nodded and reached for the door control. "Wait," Reeves interrupted, his face ashen. "You're actually going through with this? Once we take off, there's no coming back. Ever." Blackwell's expression hardened. "You're welcome to stay behind, Reeves. I'm sure Detective Harris would love to hear everything you know." The threat hung in the air between them. Reeves had been Blackwell's right hand for years, involved in enough questionable activities to earn his own place in an indictment. "Close the door," Reeves said quietly. The flight attendant pressed the button, and the door began its mechanical closing sequence. Through the narrowing gap, Blackwell watched Harris and Wilson break into a run across the tarmac. Too late, he thought with grim satisfaction. Too late. The door sealed with a pressurized hiss. The flight attendant picked up the cabin phone. "We're secure, Captain. Ready for departure." The engines whined as they spooled up, and the small jet began to move away from the terminal. Blackwell sank into a plush leather seat, finally allowing himself to breathe. "We made it," he muttered, more to himself than to Reeves. Through the window he could see Harris and Wilson standing on the tarmac, watching the plane pull away. The sight gave him a petty sense of victory. After months of investigation, after all her digging and probing and questioning, Detective Simone Harris would return to headquarters empty-handed. His satisfaction lasted exactly 27 seconds. The jet jolted to a stop. The engines, which had been building to takeoff power, suddenly quieted to an idle. "What's happening?" Blackwell demanded, pressing the call button for the flight attendant. Before she could answer, the cabin speakers crackled. "This is your captain speaking," a tense voice announced. "We've been instructed by the tower to abort takeoff. Airport police have ordered us to return to the terminal." Blackwell's momentary triumph crumbled into ash. "Override it," he ordered. When the flight attendant appeared, Tell the pilot I'll pay double, triple, whatever it takes. We need to take off now. She shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, sir. The captain cannot disobey direct orders from air traffic control. It's not just against regulations. It's a federal offense. Do you know who I am? Blackwell's voice rose. I'm the chief of police. This is a matter of urgent public safety. Yes, sir, I understand, the flight attendant replied with practiced patience. But the captain has final authority over this aircraft, and he's turning back to the terminal. Sure enough, the plane was slowly pivoting, retracing its path toward the spot they had just left. Through the window, Blackwell could see Harris and Wilson still standing on the tarmac, now joined by several airport police vehicles with lights flashing. This can't be happening, Reeves murmured, his face gray with shock. We were so close. Blackwell didn't respond. His mind was already shifting to damage control. If he couldn't escape, he needed to manage the situation, control the narrative. It's what he'd always done. Listen to me, he said, leaning closer to Reeves. When we stop, I'll go out first. I'll talk to Harris, explain that this was all a misunderstanding, a planned vacation that I forgot to clear through proper channels. Reeves looked at him incredulously. A vacation to a non-extradition country? The day after they interviewed? The witness from the community center? They're not going to believe that. It doesn't matter what they believe, Blackwell snapped. It matters what they can prove. And right now, all they can prove is that I was taking a trip without notifying the department. A stupid mistake, but not a crime. The jet came to a final stop at the same spot it had departed from minutes earlier. Through the windows, Blackwell could sight. They were surrounded. 2 airport police cars, several uniformed officers, and at the front, Harris and Wilson, waiting. The cabin speakers crackled again. Gentlemen, the captain has powered down the engines. Airport police are requesting that you disembark immediately. Blackwell straightened his tie, adjusted his jacket, and put on the confident expression he'd perfected over decades in law enforcement. The face that stared down reporters, politicians, and subordinates alike. The face that said he was in control, no matter the circumstances. Remember, he said to Reeves, this was just a vacation, nothing more. The flight attendant approached the door. They're bringing the stairs back to the aircraft, she informed them. We'll be able to open the door in just a moment. Blackwell nodded, using the brief delay to mentally rehearse what he would say. How he would greet Harris with surprise rather than anger. How he would express confusion about the warrant. How he would maintain his dignity even as they placed him in handcuffs. Because they would, he knew that now. Harris hadn't come all this way to leave without her prize. The mechanical whir of the door interrupted his thoughts. Sunlight spilled into the cabin as the sealed environment was breached. Blackwell took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and moved toward the exit. Chief Blackwell, he heard Harris call as he appeared in the doorway. I have a warrant for your arrest. He made himself smile, the practiced political smile that had charmed voters for years. Detective Harris, he replied, his voice carrying easily across the tarmac. There seems to be some confusion. I was just taking a short vacation. Harris didn't smile back. A vacation to San Lorenzo? With 3 suitcases and your pension funds transferred to an offshore account yesterday? That's quite a spontaneous trip. Blackwell's smile faltered. She knew about the money transfers. That hadn't been in any of the reports he'd seen. Who the hell was feeding her information? I'm happy to discuss my personal finances back at the station, he said, descending the stairs with measured steps. This public spectacle isn't necessary. Neither was instructing Officer Dawson to detain me as a security threat, Harris replied coolly, or filing a false security alert with airport police. But here we are. As Blackwell reached the bottom of the stairs, Wilson stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Richard Blackwell, you're under arrest for embezzlement of public funds, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and abuse of official capacity. You have the right to remain silent. The familiar words of the Miranda warning washed over Blackwell as the cold metal closed around his wrists. Not for the first time, he noted the irony of having recited these same words to countless others throughout his career, never imagining they would one day be directed at him. Behind him, Reeves was being escorted down the stairs by a uniformed officer, his own hands now cuffed behind his back. The younger man looked shell-shocked, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. "This is a mistake," Blackwell said loudly as Wilson finished the warning. He turned his head, making sure his voice carried to the small crowd of airport workers and security personnel watching from a distance. "These accusations are completely unfounded. I look forward to clearing my name." Harris stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "We have the financial records, Chief. We have the witness statements, the original ones and the altered versions. We have the recordings from your office. It's over." For a moment, Blackwell's carefully maintained facade cracked. "Recordings? That's not possible. I swept my office myself." A small, satisfied smile crossed Harris's face. "Yes, you did. Every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., which is why we installed the new devices every Tuesday afternoon." The realization hit Blackwell like a physical blow. All those private conversations, all those deals and threats and arrangements spoken aloud in what he'd believed was the security of his office. Recorded. Preserved. Damning. "You can't use those," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "No judge would allow it." "Judge Hernandez disagrees," Harris replied. "She found our warrant applications quite compelling. In fact, she expedited this one personally when she heard you'd booked a flight." They began walking toward the terminal, a grim procession of officers and arrested men. Blackwell could see people pressed against the windows inside, phones raised, to capture the moment. By nightfall, this image would be on every news channel, every social media feed. The chief of police in handcuffs, being led away by the very officers he once commanded. "Was it worth it?" Harris asked quietly as they walked. "All of it. The money, the favors, the threats. Was it worth ending like this?" Blackwell didn't answer. His mind was already elsewhere, calculating new odds, planning new strategies. This wasn't the end. It was a setback, certainly. A public humiliation, undeniably. But he still had friends in high places. He still had leverage, information that others wouldn't want exposed. As they reached the terminal doors, he turned to Harris. "You know, Detective, you've impressed me. Not many officers would have the courage to come after the chief." "It wasn't courage," she replied. "It was the job, the same job you swore to do." The doors opened and they stepped into the terminal. The crowd that had gathered earlier had grown, held back by airport security but still pressing forward, eager to witness the spectacle. Phones flashed as people took pictures. Voices rose in confused questions. Blackwell spotted Officer Dawson among the security personnel, his face a mask of shock and dismay. Their eyes met briefly, the chief and his loyal foot soldier, both realizing their miscalculation had led to this moment. "Chief Blackwell." A reporter had somehow made it into the terminal, microphone extended. "Is it true you were attempting to flee the country? What do you say to the allegations of corruption?" Before Blackwell could respond, Wilson stepped between them. "No comments at this time. An official statement will be issued by the department." They continued through the terminal, the procession drawing more attention with every step. Blackwell kept his head high, his expression neutral. He'd seen enough perp walks in his career to know that appearances mattered. The news would show these images tonight. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of capturing him looking defeated. As they approached the main exit, Captain Reynolds was waiting, his face grim. The captain who had authorized the investigation, who had sent Harris after one of the most powerful men in the city. The risk he had taken was not lost on Blackwell. "Captain," Blackwell greeted him with forced cordiality. "Quite the operation you've put together." Reynolds didn't take the bait. "Detective Harris," he said, ignoring Blackwell entirely. "Good work. The transport is ready." Harris nodded. "Thank you, sir. We're ready to proceed." They moved toward the exit, where a nondescript police vehicle waited rather than the usual marked cars. A small mercy, Blackwell realized. They weren't parading him past the main airport entrance where larger crowds might have gathered. As they approached the vehicle, a thought struck him. "You knew," he said to Harris. "You knew I'd run. This Whole thing. The timing of the warrant, the airport setup, you were counting on me trying to leave. Harris opened the car door. Get in, Chief. Why not just arrest me at headquarters, or at home? Why go through all this? For a moment, Harris said nothing. Then she leaned closer. Because Officer Brian Chen deserved better. The name hit Blackwell like a splash of cold water. Brian Chen, the young patrol officer who had reported irregularities in the Community Outreach Fund, the whistleblower who had been reassigned to the worst beat in the city, whose reports were mysteriously lost, whose career had been effectively ended when he dared to question the chief's accounting, the officer whose complaint had first landed on Detective Simone Harris's desk 6 months ago, setting this whole investigation in motion. Chen was naive, Blackwell said dismissively. He didn't understand how things work. He understood perfectly, Harris countered. He understood that the badge means something, that we have a duty to the people we serve, not to ourselves. Xiao gestured to the waiting car. Now get in, we have a lot of paperwork ahead of us. As Blackwell ducked into the back seat, he caught a final glimpse of the terminal behind him, of the curious faces watching through the glass, of Officer Dawson, still standing where they'd left him, the realization of his own complicity slowly dawning. Then the door closed, sealing him in the quiet interior of the police vehicle. Wilson got into the driver's seat while Harris sat in the passenger side. The partition between front and back was closed, standard procedure for transporting suspects, even those who until recently had commanded the entire department. As the ADAR car pulled away from the curb, Blackwell leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The game wasn't over. Not yet. There were still moves to be made, pieces to sacrifice, strategies to employ. But for now, as the airport receded behind them and the reality of his situation settled like a weight on his chest, Chief Richard Blackwell allowed himself to acknowledge what he had spent months denying. Detective Simone Harris had beaten him at his own game, and she had done it by playing by the rules he had so casually discarded. Officer Kevin Dawson stood frozen in place as he watched Detective Harris and her partner lead Chief Blackwell through the terminal in handcuffs. The reality of what had just happened was still sinking in like cold water slowly seeping through layers of clothing. He had stopped her, called her a threat, nearly drawn his weapon on a fellow officer who was doing her job. Around him, the crowd of onlookers continued to grow, many with phones raised to capture the historic moment, the city's police chief being arrested in the middle of a busy airport terminal. Dawson could already imagine the headlines, the news reports, the social media frenzy. And somewhere in that coverage would be his name, his face, his actions. Officer Dawson. A firm voice broke through his thoughts. Captain Reynolds was standing before him, his expression unreadable. I need a word with you. Now. Dawson swallowed, hard. Yes, sir. Reynolds gestured toward a quieter area near an empty gate. Once they were away from the crowd, the captain's professional mask slipped, revealing cold fury beneath. Explain to me, Reynolds said, his voice dangerously quiet. Why one of my detectives was just treated like a criminal by airport security while attempting to serve a lawfully obtained warrant. Dawson struggled to find his voice. Sir, I was following protocol. Chief Blackwell had issued a security alert. Cut the bullshit, Dawson, Reynolds interrupted. You knew exactly who Detective Harris was. You saw her badge. You heard her identify herself. And you deliberately obstructed her while referring to her as a threat over an open radio channel. I was told to be on high alert, Dawson insisted, though his confidence was wavering. The chief said there were credible threats against him, and you didn't find it at all suspicious that these supposed threats coincided with him attempting to board a private jet to a country with no extradition treaty? Reynolds's voice dripped with sarcasm. With 3 suitcases and all his financial assets transferred offshore? Dawson had no answer for that. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture he didn't want to see. He had been used, set up as an unwitting accomplice in Blackwell's escape plan. I didn't know, he said finally. I thought I was protecting him from a legitimate threat. Reynolds studied him for a long moment. Professional standards will be conducting a full investigation into your actions today. I suggest you get your story straight before then, and I strongly advise you to be honest about any prior communications with Chief Blackwell regarding his travel plans or Detective Harris's investigation. The implication was clear. Reynolds suspected Dawson of being more than just an unwitting pawn. The thought stung, but Dawson couldn't entirely blame him for the suspicion. From the outside, his actions must have looked deliberate, coordinated. "I'll cooperate fully with any investigation," Dawson said stiffly. Reynolds nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "In the meantime, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately. Turn in your badge and weapon to Lieutenant Patel before you leave today." The words hit Dawson like a physical blow. Administrative leave. The first step in what could be a career-ending process. Everything he'd worked for, teetering on the edge because of one monumentally bad judgment call. "Yes, sir," he managed to say. Reynolds turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Dawson. The security footage from this terminal will be reviewed as part of the investigation. Every second of your interaction with Detective Harris, every word you said to her and about her, keep that in mind when you're preparing your statement." With that parting shot, Reynolds walked away, leaving Dawson alone with the crushing weight of his actions. The next few hours passed in a blur. Dawson gave his preliminary statement to an internal affairs officer who had been dispatched to the airport. He surrendered his badge and gun to Lieutenant Patel, avoiding the older man's disappointed gaze. He changed out of his uniform in the airport locker room, feeling strangely vulnerable in civilian clothes. By the time he stepped outside, the afternoon sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. His phone had been buzzing continuously, messages from fellow officers, news alerts about Blackwell's arrest, and most disturbingly, notifications that his name was already being mentioned in online discussions about the incident. He sat in his car for a long time without starting the engine, trying to process everything that had happened. How had he gotten it so wrong? Had he really been so blind, so eager to please Blackwell that he'd ignored all the warning signs? The answer, he knew, was yes. And now he had to live with the consequences. When he finally turned the key and pulled out of the parking lot, Dawson had no clear destination in mind. He couldn't face going home yet. Couldn't bear the thought of explaining to his wife why he was home early, why he didn't have his badge, why his name might soon be all over the local news. He drove aimlessly through the city streets as darkness fell, eventually finding himself in a quiet neighborhood across town from his own. Without conscious decision, he pulled up in front of a modest single-story house with a well-maintained lawn. The home of Officer Brian Chen had been 2 years behind Dawson at the academy. They weren't close friends, but they had worked together occasionally before Chen's sudden transfer to the worst beat in the city. At the time, Dawson had heard rumors that Chen had made waves, questioned things he shouldn't have. Dawson had dismissed it as the rookie not understanding how things worked. Now, sitting outside Chen's house, Dawson wondered what might have happened if he had paid more attention, if he had asked questions himself instead of blindly following orders. The front door opened, and Chen stepped out onto the porch, alerted by the unfamiliar car sitting in front of his house. Even from this distance, Dawson could see the wariness in his posture. After a moment's hesitation, Dawson got out of the car. "It's just me, Chen," he called softly. "Kevin Dawson." Chen didn't relax. "What do you want, Dawson?" The coldness in his voice was justified, Dawson knew. After all, he had been one of the many who had shunned Chen after his transfer, treating him like he had some contagious disease. Dawson struggled to find the words. "I heard about Blackwell's arrest. I thought you might have some insight." Chen's laugh was short and bitter. "Now you want my insight? Where was this interest when I was being railroaded for doing my job?" The accusation stung because it was true. Dawson had stayed silent, looked the other way, told himself it wasn't his business. "I made a mistake today," Dawson admitted. "A big one. I stopped a detective who was trying to arrest Blackwell. I didn't listen when she identified herself. I almost let him get away." Interest flickered across Chen's face. "You're talking about Detective Harris?" Dawson nodded. "You know her. She's the only one who took my complaint seriously." Chen's voice softened slightly. "The only one who wasn't. Afraid to go after Blackwell." Dawson looked down at his hands, ashamed. "I nearly drew my weapon on her today. Called her a threat over the radio. All because Blackwell told me to be on alert for anyone trying to interfere with his travel plans." Chen was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. "You better come inside. Sounds like you've had quite a day." The gesture of hospitality, undeserved as it was, nearly undid Dawson. He nodded gratefully and followed Chen into the house. The living room was sparsely furnished but neat. A small dining table was covered with papers and a laptop. Chen had clearly been working when Dawson arrived. "Have a seat," Chen offered, gesturing to the couch. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be great," Dawson said, suddenly aware of how dry his throat was. As Chen disappeared into the kitchen, Dawson noticed a photograph on the wall, Chen's academy graduation, his proud parents beaming beside him. It was a reminder of how much the younger officer had sacrificed by speaking up. Chen returned with 2 glasses of water and sat in the armchair across from Dawson. "So," he said, "tell me what happened today." Dawson took a deep breath and recounted the entire incident, Blackwell's instructions about security concerns, Harris's arrival, his own obstruction, and the chief's attempted escape. Chen listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "And now, I'm on administrative leave," Dawson concluded. "Professional standards is investigating. My career is probably over." Chen took a sip of his water. "Maybe. Or maybe this is a chance to set things right." Dawson looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Chen said carefully, "that you have a choice now. You can try to minimize your involvement, claim you were just following orders, hope it all blows over. Or you can tell the truth about everything you know. Help them build their case against Blackwell." "I don't know anything," Dawson protested. "I was just doing what he told me to do today." Chen raised an eyebrow. "Really? In all your time working security details for Blackwell, you never saw anything questionable? Never heard anything that made you uncomfortable? Never wondered why certain people got special treatment or why certain investigations were suddenly dropped?" Dawson's silence was answer enough. Of course, there had been things, small irregularities, odd coincidences, moments that had made him uneasy, but he had always looked away, told himself it wasn't his place to question. "That's what I thought," Chen said quietly. "We all saw things, Dawson. The difference is some of us couldn't pretend we didn't." The accusation hung in the air between them, uncomfortable, but undeniable. "What would you do?" Dawson asked finally. "If you were in my position now?" Chen considered the question. "I'd talk to Detective Harris, tell her everything I knew, everything I'd seen or heard that might be relevant to her case, and I'd accept whatever consequences came with that. Even if it meant losing my job, my pension, even then." Chen's gaze was steady. "Because at the end of the day, the badge is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to stand for justice, not for protecting the powerful at the expense of the truth." They were the words of an idealist, Dawson thought. But hadn't he once been an idealist too? Hadn't he joined the force because he believed in those same principles? "I don't even know how to reach Detective Harris," he said, grasping at practical objections. Chen smiled slightly. "I have her number. She checks in with me sometimes, lets me know how the investigation is going." He reached for his phone. "I can text her now if you want, tell her you want to talk." Dawson hesitated, standing at the crossroads of his career, his integrity, his future. The easy path would be to walk away, hire a good lawyer, focus on protecting himself. But would he ever be able to look at himself in the mirror again if he did? "Okay," he said finally. "Send the text." Chen typed quickly, then set his phone down. "She might not respond right away. She's probably pretty busy today." Dawson. nodded, imagining the mountain of paperwork that would accompany the arrest of the police chief. Yeah, I bet she is. They sat in silence for a moment. Two officers from opposite sides of a line that shouldn't have existed. Then Chen spoke again, his voice softer. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad cop, Dawson. I think you're like most of us, trying to do a difficult job, following the lead of those above you, not wanting to make waves. The system encourages that kind of conformity. That doesn't excuse what I did today, Dawson said. I could have gotten her hurt. I nearly drew my weapon on a fellow officer. No, it doesn't excuse it, Chen agreed. But it explains it. And understanding why we make the wrong choices is the first step toward making better ones. Chen's phone buzzed, making them both jump. He checked the screen, then looked up at Dawson. It's Harris. She says she can meet you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. at Westside Coffee Shop. Neutral ground, away from the station. Dawson felt a surge of anxiety, but also relief. At least she was willing to hear him out. Tell her I'll be there. As Chen typed the response, Dawson looked around the modest living room again. This was the home of an officer who had risked everything to do the right thing, who had suffered for his principles but hadn't abandoned them. Thank you, Dawson, said when Chen set the phone down, for not shutting the door in my face, for giving me a chance to make this right. Chen's smile was small but genuine. We're supposed to be on the same side, remember? The side of the law, not the side of any individual. It was a simple statement of an ideal that had somehow gotten lost in the day-to-day reality of departmental politics and power dynamics. An ideal that Dawson wanted to believe in again. I should go, he said, standing up. Let you get back to your evening, but thank you. Really. Chen walked him to the door. Good luck tomorrow, Dawson. Just tell her the truth. That's all any of us can do. As Dawson drove home through the darkened city streets, he felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. His career might be over. His reputation might be irreparably damaged. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally making the right choice. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Dawson arrived at the Westside Coffee Shop 20 minutes early, his stomach in knots. He chose a table in the back corner with a clear view of the door, and ordered a coffee he knew he wouldn't drink. At precisely 8 a.m., Detective Simone Harris walked in. She looked different in the daylight, away from the chaotic setting of the airport terminal. More human somehow. Less like the imposing figure that had stood her ground against his threats. She spotted him immediately and walked over, her expression unreadable. Dawson stood awkwardly, unsure of the protocol for greeting an officer he had nearly arrested the day before. Detective Harris, he began. Thank you for— Save it, she interrupted, sliding into the seat across from him. Chen says you have information. That's the only reason I'm here. Dawson nodded, accepting the cold reception as his due. I do. Or at least I think I do. Things I've seen working security for Blackwell. Conversations I've overheard. People who came to meetings that weren't on any official schedule. Harris studied him for a long moment as if weighing his sincerity. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook and pen. Start from the beginning, she said, and don't leave anything out. So he did. For the next 2 hours, Dawson talked. He told her about the private meetings with developers, whose projects mysteriously received expedited permits, about the envelopes that changed hands in parked cars, about the phone calls Blackwell made from burner phones that he discarded after each use. Harris took notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. Her expression remained professional, giving nothing away. Why now? She asked when he finally fell silent. Why come forward after all this time? It was the question Dawson had been asking himself since yesterday. Because I was wrong, he said simply. Yesterday at the airport, I wasn't protecting the law. I was protecting a man who thought he was above it. And that's not why I became a cop. Harris's expression softened slightly. And you're willing to put all this in an official statement? Testify if necessary? Yes, Dawson said without hesitation. Whatever it takes to make this right. She closed her notebook and looked at him directly, It won't make it right, Dawson. Nothing can undo what happened yesterday. That moment when you called me a threat, when you put your hand on your weapon. That wasn't just about me. It was about every black officer who's had their authority questioned, their identity challenged, their life put at risk by someone who should have been on their side. The truth of her words hit Dawson like a physical blow. "I know," he said, quietly. "And I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I am." "You're right, it's not enough." Harris stood up, gathering her things. "But your testimony against Blackwell might help ensure that kind of power abuse doesn't continue. So for that, I'll accept your cooperation." She turned to leave, then paused. "The professional standards hearing is scheduled for next Wednesday. I'll be there giving my account of what happened. I won't lie for you, Dawson, but if you're honest about everything, including your own actions, I'll acknowledge that you came forward voluntarily afterward. It was more than he deserved, and they both knew it." "Thank you," he said. Harris nodded once, then walked away, leaving Dawson alone with his cold coffee and the weight of his choices, past, present, and the uncertain future that stretched before him. Outside, the city was coming fully awake, citizens going about their daily lives, most of them blissfully unaware of the seismic shifts occurring within their police department. The arrest of Chief Blackwell would make headlines for weeks to come. The trial would expose corruption that had seeped into every level of city governance, and somewhere in that larger story would be the smaller tale of Officer Kevin Dawson, who had stood at a crossroads and, for once, chosen the harder but better path. It wasn't redemption, not yet, maybe not ever. But it was a step toward the officer he had once aspired to be. As he left the coffee shop and stepped into the morning sunlight, Dawson felt something he hadn't expected: hope. Not for his career or his reputation, but for the department itself. If Blackwell's arrest marked the beginning of real change, then perhaps his own mistakes could serve a purpose after all. A cautionary tale of what happened when good officers forgot their true duty. It wasn't much. But for now, it was enough to face whatever came next. 3 months after the dramatic airport arrest that had dominated headlines across the country, Detective Simone Harris sat at her desk, sorting through the mountain of paperwork that had become her constant companion. The Blackwell case had grown far beyond what anyone had initially anticipated, with new connections and allegations emerging weekly. The spring sunlight slanted through the blinds, creating golden stripes across her cluttered desk. The office around her hummed with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the occasional burst of conversation or laughter. Normal sounds that somehow felt different now, lighter perhaps, as if the department itself was breathing easier. In the aftermath of Blackwell's removal, Harris. Captain Reynolds appeared in her doorway, coffee mug in hand. "Got a minute?" Simone nodded, grateful for the interruption. "Of course, sir." Reynolds closed the door behind him and took a seat across from her. "Just got word from the DA's office. Blackwell's lawyer reached out this morning. They're discussing a plea deal." Simone sat back, processing this information. After months of Blackwell's public denials and claims of a department conspiracy against him, a plea deal represented a significant shift in strategy. "What are the terms?" she asked. "He pleads guilty to embezzlement and obstruction, gets 5 to 7 years. In exchange, they drop the witness tampering charges and he provides information on the developers and city officials involved in the kickback scheme." Simone considered this. It was less time than Blackwell deserved, but the wider corruption net was a valuable trade-off. "And the DA is considering it?" Reynolds nodded. "The corruption angle has always been the bigger picture. Blackwell was just one part of a system that's been broken for a long time." He took a sip of his coffee. "Plus, a plea means no trial, no dragging the department's name through the mud for weeks in the media." That last point was significant. The past 3 months had been difficult for the entire department. Public trust at an all-time low, officers facing hostility on the streets, recruitment numbers plummeting. A lengthy, high-profile trial would only prolong the pain. "I understand the logic," Simone said carefully, "but it still feels like he's getting off too easy." Reynolds smiled slightly. "I knew you'd say that. That's why I wanted to tell you in person. The DA values your opinion on this, given your role in the case. If you strongly object, the